Hello everyone, I'm the person who made the page. Okay, so we have a Michael Jordan fan who wants to go on. He's from YouTube. He goes by the YouTube username of else Smider. He thinks that Michael Jordan has the number one case to be the number one NBA player of all time, and he would like to explain why he thinks Michael Jordan has the number one case to be the number one NBA player of all time. So let me put him on. Hey, welcome to the program.
Well, I believe that we have a lot of different eras, and Michael Jordan stated it himself that it's very difficult to say who the greatest player is across eras because he, for example, never played against Jerry West. He obviously didn't compete against the likes of LeBron James or Jokic, any of the modern players. So it's very difficult.
Now, real quick, he wouldn't have to, though, right? You don't have to play against everyone if you're going to rank players and if you're going to determine who's the number one NBA player of all time.
It's a lot easier to compare two players who are contemporaries who played against each other because you have a much clearer case. When you go from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s to the 80s by decade, you have different rules. So, for example, if I were to take Kyrie Irving and I were to pit him against Bob Cousy, every single dribble that Kyrie Irving made would be illegal. And he would have a turnover every single time he touched the ball.
By the way, you could also find out certain things that Michael Jordan did that would be illegal if he played in those times too. And of course, it would work other ways too. If players are used to certain things in the past, they would also maybe not be used to certain things if they played later on. But to your point about how it's much easier to, I don't have your exact words, you said something like it's much easier to figure it out. No, it's not easier. It just means they played together and you believe there's an easy way to figure out. There's no easy way to figure out just because they played against each other.
It's a lot easier because they played under the same sets of rules.
Okay.
So for example, there was a premium on inside play and big centers and things like that back in the day. Back when Jordan played, for example. In the modern game, a guy like Patrick Ewing, in my opinion, would not fare as well because the rules have changed, and you don't have the need for his skill set. Whereas back then, his skill set was more in demand. So, playing under the same sets of rules, and same thing as I said with Kyrie Irving or whoever it is, whoever you think is a great dribbler, put him up against Pete Maravich or whoever else was a great dribbler in the past. If they have different rules and every time one guy dribbles it's a turnover and the other guy dribbles and it's not a turnover, it's not really fair to for example, if you're doing an Allen Iverson.
There's a lot of points there, so let me just go one at a time. Yeah. So I'll try my best to remember each thing here. I know you believe it's easier, and you say it's an opinion. It's not an opinion, actually. It's a claim. You're claiming this is true, and if you make a claim, it'd be nice if you proved it, and there's no way to prove it, as I'm sure you know. Also, if they played against each other, your point is legit if you were to say it makes it easier in some ways because they're playing against each other, so there's certain things that are similar, but that still doesn't make it easier overall because how you're admitting that, look, if they don't play at the same time, there's a lot of other variables. So it's going to be hard to compare players who don't play at the same time. But if they play at the same time, there's still a lot of variables. So it doesn't really get easier. To the point you made Patrick Ewing, when you say his skill set was more, what was the word you used? It was more needed back then? There was something you said like that. Do you want to remind me, or is that pretty much what it was about Patrick Ewing?
Yes, just the style of the game where you're allowed to slow people down, you're allowed to check people with your arm, you're essentially allowed to hold people down. Some people could argue if you go a little bit earlier, you were allowed to tackle them and play a little bit of football with them, be roughhouse with them. Yeah. Certainly a bigger, stronger Charles Oakley, Patrick Ewing type of guy would be more effective than a Kevin Durant type player who might get broken like a twig. If depending on the rules, you take a Bill Laimbeer and you hit a guy like Kevin Durant, he's not going to hold up as well as a guy like Charles Oakley.
I got you. So there's a lot of problems there. So number one, these are your beliefs, and if you believe those things, I'm not going to tell you you're right or wrong because those are your beliefs. But there's no way to prove these things, and actually, there's evidence of plenty of players who are physically stronger, or like what you said, like a twig, or in the middle, or whatever, that play in all eras, and some of them do great, some of them are in the middle, some of them don't do as well, and so on. It just depends. For example, you brought up Kevin Durant. Well, there was a guy by the name of Ralph Sampson. There's a guy by the name of George Gervin who are very skinny, and they dominate when they play. And again, it just depends. And also, all players who were professional NBA players, especially Hall of Famers, they can play in any time. They just, what do you do when you play in any sport? If someone is doing a good job, you try to figure them out, you try to adapt, you try to adjust, and things like that. And two more things. There's no evidence. Let's say I'm wrong, okay? Let's say everything I told you was wrong. If you look at the years of the NBA as time passes, there's no evidence that some dominating player all of a sudden did much better or did much worse because of a new so-called era and a new so-called rule, or maybe it was more some rule was enforced or something like that. And the last and final thing, how would you even figure out when an era starts and finishes?
I would disagree with that. I think LeBron James, for example, has been a great beneficiary of that. Excuse me?
I said a Michael Jordan fan has brought up LeBron James.
Yeah, I mean, LeBron is clearly one of the top players of all time, in my opinion. And the reality is, you're right. You can go across any great player in any era, in my opinion, would be great in another era because they would adapt and because they're great athletes and they know how to win and they're just great players and they will change. Kyrie Irving, if he went back to play against Bob Cousy, guess what? He'd learn how to dribble so that it wouldn't be called a turnover every possession. So, I mean, that's just what great players do. They would adapt, and you're right. Great players are great players. So, and the other thing is, when we're talking about GOATs, we are going to have to, they're all great players. I'm sure you would admit that Michael Jordan was a great player, Wilt Chamberlain was a great player, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a great player. It doesn't matter who you're talking about when you're talking about GOAT players. They certainly are fantastic players, and they would be in any era, in my opinion.
Sure, no, it sounds like you agree with me, but in the beginning you were saying you don't agree with that, or you don't agree with any of that, or something like that. I don't have the exact words. So what were you not agreeing with?
No, I'm just saying that, it's difficult. The team composition, the way teams play, the way they're coached, that is affected by the rules that are called and the decades or in the eras that they're in. And you can basically say that we had different eras, whether you're talking about average points per game, like pace of play, for example. In the 1960s, we had a much, much higher pace of play. And
who agrees with me? You know who I've heard that from? Whenever I heard about pace of play, it's usually Michael Jordan fans. I've never heard anyone else say there's a difference in the era because of pace of play other than Michael Jordan fans.
Well, it's a fact that there's a difference. If you look at the average points per game, you can actually see it go from about 115 points per game down to about 95 points per game. And yes, there was a change and so obviously if you have more Showtime Lakers type basketball, you're going to have inflated scoring. It's just
there's a couple things here. So you're right about the part where there were differences. There's always going to be differences. There's going to be differences between this season and last season, but that doesn't mean this is the start of one era or the end of an era or a start of a new era or something like that. It's just people making up their own definitions of what they think is one era and another. And also when you say, like you gave the example of Showtime basketball and inflated things, you're basically making the point that for every action, there's a reaction. If you do this, this is going to happen. But you can do this for any year in the NBA. Anything you do in the NBA, any action is going to have a reaction. So in other words, what NBA year could you come up with where something didn't affect something?
Well, for example, the introduction of the three-point line is a major change. That is, if you take Steph Curry or something and you take him back in the 60s, he's not going to be as effective shooting from three-point as for the three-point line. It's just math. So there are certain things, and there are certain changes in rules that do objectively change the game to such a degree that you can say it is a different era. It's a different era when you don't have a three-point line, and then you do have a three-point line.
That's true. Okay.
Wilt Chamberlain, they changed many rules of the game. Same thing with...
So are you saying, I agree with you, three-point line makes a difference. Like I said, every action makes a reaction. But again, the question is, can you find any year where some action didn't have a reaction? And also, the three-point line, which is a big rule, no doubt about it, but the NBA really wasn't that different from 1978 to 1979. It's the same people, basically, doing the same things, basically.
Well, yeah, but the coaching was different. The entire offense, they hadn't yet figured out how to use the three-point line. They didn't know that the players hadn't been able to train. So you did not have good three-point shooters because there was no reason to practice from Steph Curry range.
That's not true. There were ABA players who had the three-point line. There were coaches who coached with players who had a three-point line. There were people in other leagues that had a 3-point line. And anyway, even if I'm wrong about all that, there's lots of players who could shoot the ball from that far. They just didn't have a 3-point line. So Pete Maravich, for example, could shoot that far. So could Jerry West. So could actually Dr. J and others. But they just didn't have a 3-point line. It's now, I'm not saying there's no differences. Remember, I'm agreeing with you that for every action, there's a reaction. I don't think that means all of a sudden this is one era and then here's another era. It's pretty much the same.
Well, you're getting into semantics. I think it's very clearly a different era when you have before 3-point line, after 3-point line, when you have hand checking, you have no hand checking, you have illegal defense, you don't have, you're allowed zone defense. These changes completely change the game.
No, they do. Remember, I'm agreeing with you. Every action is a reaction. There's no dispute that one rule change makes a difference. I'm disputing how big of a difference it is, and if the difference goes to the point where here's one era and here's another era. If you say I'm playing semantics, but I'm actually not, you're actually playing semantics because you're taking one thing, or you gave more examples right now. You're taking cherry-picked examples and saying this counts as one era and this counts as another era. And remember, even if I'm wrong, let's say I'm wrong, by your logic, this year is a new era from last year. This year is different from last year because there's always going to be some change in the league every year. What year didn't have a change?
Well, all years have changes, but if you talk about, for example, a Michael Jordan era, you're talking about the time when he played. So if you're talking about a Wilt Chamberlain era and a Bill Russell era, it is clearly different from a Michael Jordan era.
I'm going to get you on
they
something.
were retired at that time, and Michael Jordan was he was either young or not even born yet.
I'm going to get you on something. So remember, you brought up the example of the 3-point line, and you brought up other examples too. So you were disputing me that 1978 is when I was saying it's not that different from 1979. So here's a question for you. What era did Kareem Abdul-Jabbar come from? Because he came in 1969 and he played all the way to 1989. And then, go ahead.
Yeah, he's one of the players who crosses over different eras, certainly. For example, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is not in the modern era. He's not in the modern NBA. He has since retired, and everyone's era comes to an end. He started.
There's a couple problems here already. So when you say he's one of the players that overlapped or whatever, I don't have the exact words. Don't quote me. But when you say that. Yeah, he played a lot of years, but there's lots of Hall of Famers who played lots of years. Michael Jordan did. LeBron James is doing it. And there's more examples, but you get the point. And also, if you say, well, look, they're still overlapping, then remember what I said to you earlier? There's no evidence of any Hall of Famer basically doing better or doing worse because all of a sudden the era is different. They all pretty much do the same.
I disagree.
Okay.
I mean, for example, we look at the 1950s and 60s. The basketball was different. They were playing in those lousy shoes. The shooting percentages were low.
You missed what I said. You missed what I said. There's no evidence of a player's. Like, basically, do you have any examples of an NBA Hall of Famer who all of a sudden did better or did worse because all of a sudden there's a so-called new era?
Not relative to their era, but yes, if you're comparing shooting percentages, yes. If you're talking about all sorts of statistics, sure, there are lots of differences between eras.
What does that mean? They're not relative to their era. What do you mean by that?
So Bill Russell was fantastic in his era, but I mean, if you were to take his statistics, for example, his shooting percentages, and apply it to a different era, it's not really as relevant because the basketballs were different, the shoes were different, the travel conditions were different, so many things were different.
Right.
I think it really is appropriate to take each individual and compare him to his own era.
That's fine, but the question.
And you're right. Somebody who's excellent in his own era is going to be excellent in his own era and probably excellent in another era as well. So right, I don't think we disagree with it.
No, sure, but the question's still there. You said you don't have any examples, but if there's obviously a difference in the eras, and there's like, hey, this is one era, and this is another era, and it's pretty obvious, wouldn't there be differences in the players playing that era, meaning that their statistics would be better or worse?
Yes, I think LeBron James has some inflated statistics, for example, because you don't have people in the paint blocking as many shots.
Back to LeBron James.
And it's more difficult, or a lot of the modern players, and I'm not the only one who says this. If you listen lots of NBA experts, the ability to penetrate, go into the lane, and dunk over everybody is much easier.
Well, now we have to get into if his stats are inflated, and then we have to get into Why don't you say other players from the past stats are inflated? And then we have to get into the part that you said you're not the only one who says this, which is true, but it's usually whenever someone questions today's NBA, it's usually a Michael Jordan fan. And these people that you call experts are not experts. They're Michael Jordan fans who are just doing the same thing that you do. Now, granted, the majority of NBA fans are Michael Jordan fans, so it seems like there's a lot of people doing it. And there are. There are a lot of people. But who are they? They're Michael Jordan fans. You will never find a Jerry West fan or a Larry Bird fan or an Oscar Robertson fan and so on questioning today's NBA to the level of Michael Jordan fans. We can get into all that, but my question still goes to the other one. If there's a difference in eras, do you have any example of NBA Hall of Famers who are doing better or worse? You said LeBron James. Where is he doing better or worse? His numbers are pretty much the same.
So LeBron James is going to be fantastic in every era, but LeBron James has been exposed in several finals. I can think of the Spurs, for example.
Michael Jordan fans.
Anytime you can have LeBron James shoot outside of a few feet outside of the paint, essentially, he's been exposed as being a poor player. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about the Dallas Mavericks or the San Antonio Spurs.
He has a really great three-point percentage. What are you talking about?
His shooting outside. Here, I can actually pull up the numbers.
You're actually going to go by analytics. So this is another problem that Michael Jordan fans do. They go by these bad places that are not reliable, and then even if they are, analytics are not reliable.
He shoots about 36% outside of 3 feet in the playoffs.
Okay.
LeBron James.
Well, that's a different argument. I thought you were talking about his game as a shooter outside of that area in general. You're talking about playoffs now.
During the regular season, it was 37.5%.
Okay. So are you saying? How do you explain his 3-point percentage? Like he can't shoot outside the paint, but he can shoot farther away?
I'm telling you the statistics.
You
can explain it. You can rationalize it however you want. But you can't tell me that the statistics are not the statistics.
Oh, no, they are. But you're assuming that his statistic is happening because of an era. If he's doing bad or good, it's because he's doing bad or good. I don't even know if that statistic is true, but let's say it is. Let's say you got it from a legit place, and it's not some analytics place, and it's not some Michael Jordan loving place, and so on. Let's say it's a legit statistic. It doesn't prove that A, there's a difference in eras that's so big that where players are going to do different, and B, by your logic, I could say, well, look, here's how Michael Jordan or someone else did. His statistics are not good, so therefore it's because of an era thing?
Well, first of all, you keep saying you can't prove this and you can't prove that.
Right.
It's obvious you can't prove anything. You have to think about it and use a little bit of common sense and realize that this is not a mathematical proof.
Right.
And you just have to say that a guy who can't shoot outside of 3 feet, if you have a rim defender like they had in the past and they do not allow him as frequently to shoot within 3 feet, he will not do as well.
Okay.
And also, if we talk about LeBron's...
Let me address that.
I want to correct you. I want to correct you real quick. Because you said something about 3-point shooting percentage.
Okay.
LeBron's career 3-point shooting percentage is 34.6%.
Okay, that's pretty good.
And that is not that great.
Okay.
I mean, you wouldn't call him a great 3-point shooter.
So
again, he's in the 30-something% range.
Was Michael Jordan a good shooter behind the line?
Well, you have to look at the quantity. First of all, you have to look at the fact that they didn't shoot 3-pointers many times.
That's not my question. If you're going to tell me, because you said to me earlier, here are the statistics, you were trying to show me bluntly, here it is, those are the numbers. Why don't you do the same thing for Michael Jordan instead of giving me context? You don't give LeBron James context, but you'll give Michael Jordan context. There's a contradiction there. And why don't you just say, hey, his numbers are not as good either, so therefore he's also not a good shooter?
So let's take Michael Jordan. I'm going to look at his 3-point shooting percentage. You take the first few years he was in the league where he had
you're not answering
fewer than one.
You're not answering my question. Give me context. I could give you context for LeBron James. I could say, here's what happened, here's a reason, here's an excuse, and all that. But I'm not doing that. I just want to know, why aren't you consistently doing the same thing with Michael Jordan that you do with LeBron James?
I'm consistently applying what I'm saying to every single player.
No, okay, well, here's what you told me about LeBron James. You told me he got exposed. You said his statistics are deflated. You said to me how he doesn't do as well in the playoffs and then the regular season. And I could give you more examples, but you get the point. But you have never said any of these things about Michael Jordan. And when I asked you, you started telling me, well, here's reasons why. Put it in context, basically.
Well, let me explain to you why Michael Jordan is different than LeBron James. I think it's fair to say.
Okay, but you can do that. But then why don't you say LeBron James is also doing this because of this and that? Remember, every action, there is a reaction. You can't just ignore his three-point percentage and focus on how he is behind the paint and then say he's not a good shooter and then not do the same thing for Michael Jordan.
I'm saying LeBron James is a bad shooter and Michael Jordan is a good shooter.
And that makes
it's backed up. It's backed up. So many of LeBron James's scores are dunks.
And so was Michael Jordan. He dunked on a lot of points too. What are you talking about?
Of course, they both did. If you're looking at the percentage of points inside the paint that Jordan scored, Jordan was a great mid-range shooter and a mid-range scorer. You can't tell me.
Hang on. Later in his career, he became a great mid-range shooter. In the beginning of his career, he was an inside guy and he was not a good shooter, including behind the three-point line. He was not a good shooter. But later on, he stopped going inside as much and he became a better mid-range shooter.
You are correct.
Okay.
He became a much better. He improved and he constantly worked on his game throughout the years. Right. And his three-point shooting was absolutely terrible the first few years he was in the league. However, it's completely irrelevant because his three-point attempts were under one per game. In other words, every single one of his three-point shots, or the vast majority of them, were under duress, either from a shot clock running down or for whatever reason. It's a forced shot.
You literally made all that up. There's no evidence of any of that. I'm not saying it never happened. I'm sure you can find me.
I watched them.
Hold on. You didn't watch every.
I watched them play.
Well, you can't say. I don't know why you would laugh. Every game is not available on tape. You can't watch every game. And even if you did, even if you found some,
I watched a lot of games of Michael Jordan.
I believe you, and so did a lot of other people. So, am I supposed to say that your tape is better than their tape? Because there's a lot of people, including the people you call experts, who will disagree with you. See, what's really happening is you're into Michael Jordan and you're going by what they show and you're cherry picking things and you don't like LeBron James.
I never said I don't like LeBron James. I said he's one of the top. I said he's one of the top players. I said I believe he is slightly overrated. I still think he's one of the top. He's certainly in the GOAT conversation. However, let me make one point because I believe you're incorrect. Wait. Let me go back.
Go ahead.
If somebody takes, on average, less than one three-point attempt per game, whether it's under duress or not, those three-point shooting statistics are completely irrelevant.
Says who? Says who? You?
If you have 0.6 three-point field attempts per game for an entire season, it is not going to affect the outcome of a game.
Okay, so you're saying to determine who's a good three-point shooter or mid-range shooter, you have to take a certain number of attempts. So I'd like to know, how can you prove to me what that number should be?
It's certainly not less than one because I have common sense. Okay. And nobody in that era shot the volume of three-pointers that you see today. It was not part of the game. It was not a significant part of the game. And I'll tell you about three-point shooting.
That's not true. No, that's not true. And you said you watched those games? Now, in the beginning, like 1979, maybe it wasn't as big. But when you get to the 80s, late 80s, and especially the 90s, it was definitely a significant part of the game. There were non-Hall of Famers like Nick Van Exel, who used to shoot a lot of threes, and people used to criticize them for shooting too many threes and all that. So when you act like they didn't take that many, that's not true. Now, if you say they don't take as many as today,
it is a fact that they don't. It's a fact that they don't. It's not as much part of the game. It's not planned. It's not game planned.
I'm saying you're right. They don't take as much today, but it doesn't matter because you're basically saying you can shoot with a low percentage if you don't take that many shots. It's a made-up criteria that makes no sense.
All right, so let's look at some later seasons when Michael Jordan was shooting three-pointers.
Okay, sure. Now, before you do, remember you said something earlier that I just want to address, and I gave you a shot when you said I wanted to address something earlier, so I hope you just do it with me real quickly. Earlier, you said something about this is not, I don't have the exact words, don't quote me, okay? But you said something like, this is not facts and science, there's no way to prove it and all that. There's two problems here. One, it is facts, it is science, there is a way to prove it and all that. And two, if you're saying it's not facts, it's not science, there's no way to prove it and all that, then why would you make these claims as if you're right then?
You're not making any sense, to be honest.
Well, I am. You're not.
I mean,
My questions are very logical. I can ask you again, since you said you want to go by logic. Should I ask you logically again? If you're saying they're not facts, it's not science, there's no way to prove it and all that, that's not true. Those things are there. It is facts, it is science, there is a way to prove it and all that. But
so you're telling me there's facts and science that you can tell me how Jordan's going to do it another year, how he's going to shoot?
But hang on, since you said it didn't make sense, I want to make sure you get the whole thing. The second part, if I'm wrong, and it's not facts, and it's not science, and there's no way to prove it and all that, why would you make the claim as if you're right? You're claiming a lot of things as if you're right.
I'm giving you statistics. You're claiming that Jordan did not shoot well from three-point land, so I'm going to tell you statistics.
Statistics are facts.
Yes, they are facts, but those facts you can't basically encapsulate an entire person's career with one set of stats and say,
but you did that.
These were his.
But
no, I'm not doing that. It's called supporting evidence.
Right. But
if you're talking about 3-point shooting, I think it's very relevant to say. I mean, I don't know how you can say it's not relevant to go over 3-point shooting percentages.
No, I never said it was not relevant. I don't know where you got that from, but I'm saying to you, if you're saying you got the statistics and it's legit to go over statistics, and you can't judge a player and all that by one statistic and all that. You did that with LeBron James. You judged him and you said his stats are deflated and you said he's been exposed and you cherry picked the paint under 3 feet area.
We are using two different words. Yes, I do believe you can judge somebody. Okay. You have not used the word judge. You have said the word prove over and over again.
Right. That's good.
And you cannot prove something. No, you cannot prove. I cannot prove how Michael Jordan would do in any other year. I cannot prove how LeBron James did it.
Why are you making the claim? Now who's not making sense?
What do you mean? What claim am I making that doesn't make sense?
Any claim that you told me in this call, anything that you say, this is true, this is what I think would happen, this is what I believe, and so on, these are your claims that you think are true and you're trying to back them up. But if you then say to me, hey, we can't go by facts and science, there's no way to prove it and all that, then it doesn't fit. It's a contradiction. Why would you try to prove it if there's no way to prove it?
That's incorrect.
Okay,
you're being irrational.
I don't know why you have to. Well, that's twice. A quick timeout. Quick timeout. That's twice you came at me where you said I'm not making sense and I'm irrational, and you actually laughed at me one time. Is there a way you could make your point without being negative? I wasn't negative to you before you were being negative.
Well, you're not. I don't know if you're not listening to what I'm saying, you are or not.
No, it's enough for
there's a big difference between proving proving something.
No, I'm listening to everything you say. When you play this tape back, you will see I'm addressing your points. Maybe you're not listening. And by the way, I'm not just saying prove. I've clearly said to you more than once, if you were listening, that even if I'm wrong, how do you explain this? Or hey, you have a contradiction here, or hey, this part is not true, and so on. So you're acting like this whole call is me just saying prove it. That's not true then. I don't know if you're not listening or what.
I just don't believe you've made any valid points, but if I could, I would like to go back to...
Wait. Are you really believe in this whole call I didn't make one valid point about anything?
Not any points that contradict anything that I'm saying.
I have, and you haven't. By the way, you haven't made one valid point.
Well, let me talk about 3-point shooting percentage.
Go ahead.
Okay. Obviously, because we can both agree that Michael Jordan relied a lot on his physicality early on in his career and his athleticism to dunk a lot more and to, basically he exposed other athletes when he could, and he did not develop his game as much as he did later in his career with his mid-range game, etc.
One quick dispute. His game was pretty much developed the same way, except for the 3-point shooting. Everything else was pretty much developed the same way. He was just as good in the 1980s or better than he was in the 1990s, and of course, early 2000s.
He was fantastic throughout the entire time period, but he was a different player. He relied later on in his career. He relied a lot more on his post-up and mid-range game, and early in his career. So he morphed his game, and he dominated in different ways. He developed as a player and changed as a player as his career developed.
One dispute. He was different. I agree with you on that part. Lots of players are different as they get older. Pretty much, I think every player is different when they get older. But when it comes to Michael Jordan, the player, he was just as good or better in the 1980s compared to the 1990s and the early 2000s.
Yeah, he dominated his entire career. I can't deny that. I'll just argue he did it in different ways.
The only way was there's only two basic ways. He didn't go inside as much, so he changed that, but he still went inside, and he developed a 3-point shot. Those are significant differences, but he was still pretty much the same player.
Okay, well, you said he developed a 3-point shot. That was my point. In 1994-95, when he came back, he shot 50% from 3-point, only over 17 games. The next year, he shot 42.7% from 3.
Real quick, since you want to put things in context for Michael Jordan, did you know in the 1990s, there was at least 1 year, maybe more, I'm not sure.
It moved closer,
That's right. But how come, one of my biggest issues with you Michael Jordan fans is your lack of consistency. You will have no problem pointing the finger at LeBron James or anyone else who's a threat to Michael Jordan, but you have a problem pointing the finger to Michael Jordan, and sometimes you have a problem pointing the finger to Michael Jordan for the same exact thing.
So you're conflating me with other people who support Michael Jordan. I have no idea where you're coming up with that criticism based on what I've said.
Every take you've told me so far, every take is the type of thing that only a Michael Jordan fan would say. There's nothing you've told me that's like, okay, you know what? That's something a John Stockton fan would say. It's all Michael Jordan fans who say these things.
I mean, we don't have to, the funny thing is, like, I don't know where we're going with this conversation, but we don't have to really guess what Michael Jordan would have done in other eras. Or, for example, when he played Portland in the finals against Clyde Drexler, do you remember when they talked about how Clyde Drexler and Michael Jordan were good competition with each other, and they called Clyde Drexler the Michael Jordan.
They called Clyde Drexler the Michael Jordan of the West. I know.
Yeah, so then they interviewed Jordan before the game, and they talked about 3-point shooting and how Clyde Drexler's a better 3-point shooter. And Jordan said something to the effect that Clyde Drexler is a better 3-point shooter because I let him be a better 3-point shooter. Okay. And then he went out and he had the shrug game where he shot all those 3-pointers and he buried them. Okay. If coaches had game plan like in today's game, if they had game planned around the 3-point line like they do today, if they had focused on spacing like they had today, if they had the personnel, back then Jordan did not have the personnel to be able to take advantage of the 3-point line like players today.
You said a lot there. I know you got more, but there's a lot to unpack here. I'll try my best to keep it fast so I give you a chance to follow up, and so I don't give you, if I give you too many points, it's not practical, right, for me or for you. So I'll try my best to keep it simple. Let's see here, one at a time here. Telling me about an interview and what happened in a game doesn't prove anything except what happened in the interview and what happened in the game. And also, he didn't bury the Trailblazers. Him and his team buried the Trailblazers, if you want to say someone buried someone. Also, I could find you examples of Clyde Drexler being interviewed and saying things, or other Hall of Famers being interviewed and saying things, or being challenged, and then going out in the game and, doing well and all that. So, then what? Are you going to do the same things for them that you're doing for Michael Jordan? And then also, the stuff that you said about today's NBA and the past NBA, there's a lot of problems here. I'll just give you one simple point. When you say basically they stand by the 3-point line and they don't do spacing as much and the coaching and all that.
I didn't say they don't do spacing as much. You mean back in the what I said is they game plan, they take advantage of spacing. So in the modern game, they are able to more effectively, more efficiently shoot the 3-point game because they game plan for it, and it's more of a part of the game.
Right.
Whereas it was not the case. They had more of a post-up game in the 80s and 90s. It was more post-up, and then from the post, they then went out.
Remember, I don't have the exact words. Don't quote me on the exact things. It was things like that when you were talking about today's spacing and 3-point line, preparing, and all that. None of that is true as if they do it way more today. But even if I'm wrong, let's say I'm wrong, okay? Because remember, I'm not just saying to you, prove it. I'm trying to show you, even if I'm wrong, every point you made about spacing and 3-point line and preparing and all that, they did those things back then too.
Well, yeah, but they did not. I mean, they did not take the three. First of all, if you're shooting more 3-pointers and you have more people looking to shoot from the 3-point line, you necessarily will have better spacing.
Maybe it depends on your defenders. Some people, not every. It depends on the coaching, the plays, the rules, and all that. But if you're talking about in general, they shoot more 3-pointers today. That I'm with you. That is a fact. So you can go by facts. But all the other stuff about them preparing and spacing and coach, standing by 3-point line and all that, they did those things back then. You can pull up any tape in the 1980s and especially the 1990s, and you'll see the point guard brings the ball up. He stands by the 3-point line thinking what to do. There's a center down low. There's another guy standing outside the 3-point line. They rotate the ball. They go inside. They go out, and so on. It's the same kind of a thing.
It's not. The triangle offense gave a little bit more spacing. That was a little bit of a revelation. The modern NBAs with all the cuts and all the movement. Reggie Miller was a guy who had all the movement and created a lot of spacing and all that kind of stuff. Steph Curry's a guy who comes to mind today.
How many Hall of Famers?
But there's a lot more.
How many Hall of Famers can you name that are not good at creating a lot of spacing? Shaq created space because he collapsed the defense, if that's what you're talking about. I'm not talking about, I'm just saying when you cherry pick an example like Reggie Miller, and I'm sure you have more, don't get me wrong, okay? But when you cherry pick any example or examples in, that doesn't mean you're right or wrong. It just means you're going by what you know, because if you say that there is a significant difference in certain players creating spacing, I'm with you. But how many Hall of Famers can you name that are not good at creating spacing? They can all do it. You have to be able to create spacing to do well.
I'm talking about the game in general. So nowadays there's more space. I mean, you can't tell me that there isn't more room to drive into the lane and get into the paint today than there was back in the day in the 1960s and 70s.
Well, before I tell you that,
there's more space.
Before I tell you that, here's a better question. How would you be able to take all the games from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s, and then figure out which one had more spacing and all that? How would you be able to do that?
Watch them. It's obvious.
Okay. Well, then, if it's so obvious, why doesn't
just watch the games? Just pull up any YouTube video. Look at the games. Look at the spacing. You can pull up entire games if you want. Okay. Look at the spacing. Look at any modern game. Right. You'll see it. If you don't see a huge difference, then you're not looking at the game.
Then I was no. Maybe you're misinterpreting it and being influenced by the media and stuck in the past and all that. But if I'm wrong,
I'm watching the games.
Lots of people watch. A lot of Michael Jordan fans love to tell me that they were there and they saw tape and they watched today's games and all that, as if no one else does these things. If you're right, how come everyone doesn't agree with you? Are they all just missing it and you guys are the only ones who get it? And also,
are you honestly claiming? Are you honestly trying to claim? Hold on,
one more thing. Also, if I'm wrong, I asked you a legit question. How would you be able to figure it out? If you're saying you watch the games, that's not an answer, because I've seen plenty of plays where the defense closes up and the players drive to the basket and they get 2-3 defenders on them and they get stuck in situations. It's not like they're all standing there by the 3-point line. I said to you earlier that you're saying they're standing there by the 3-point line, and you said no, you're not. But if you say there's more spacing today, wouldn't you have to say then that they're just staying there by the 3-point line?
People who stand by, I don't know what you're talking. You're like standing by the 3-point line. Nobody does that. Okay. People move. You have to have movement in an offense, or you're not going to be successful. Nobody just stands there by a 3-point line and waits for the ball to come to them.
That's my point. If it's not just standing there by the 3-point line, which we agree, I'm with you on that, and I'm glad you said all that. If they're moving around and things are changing and nothing stays the same, how can you then just label it as, well, there's more spacing today then?
Watch any game from Jerry West and Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, and watch any game today. And if you cannot notice a difference in spacing, you're blind.
There's
no way. There's huge difference in spacing.
No. It's not that there's no difference literally. I know that there's a difference between 1947 and 2024. I get that. I'm saying the differences are not so big the way you're making it seem like, because as you said earlier, nobody just stands there. They move around. They're going to different places and all that. I know those weren't your exact words, but you were making those kind of points.
The spacing is different, so it creates more opportunities. The bottom line is the spacing is different.
The bottom line is you're telling me it's different, and you watch the tape, and if anyone doesn't agree, they're blind or something like that. That's not an answer, but if you want, we can get past this and go to something else.
All right, so any of your viewers can look at any tape from different eras, and you'll see, like, from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and compare it to the 2010s and 20s, and you'll see a difference in spacing.
And by the way, just to make sure, you watched every game from every team in the history of the NBA?
I've watched plenty of them.
Okay, well, plenty of people have watched plenty of them. And by the way, before you laugh, not only are there people who watch plenty of them, there's people who played in the NBA and were all-stars and were Hall of Famers and so on, and they don't all agree with you it's that different. So are they blind or are they not paying attention?
So give me a specific example of what you're talking about.
Sure. Oscar Robertson. Oscar Robertson said in an interview, when I turn the media on, I always hear about how the game is so different. Players in the past wouldn't do as well today, and players today wouldn't do as well in the past, and it's different eras and all that. And he was like, how is the NBA so different? You shoot the ball, you rebound, you pass, and I could give you more examples, but you get the point.
I have heard Oscar Robertson's interviews, and never once did he talk about spacing. Okay. I challenge you to come up with one quote of him talking about the difference of spacing.
Well, first of all, I don't have it right now in front of me, but just because you watch lots of interviews doesn't mean it doesn't exist, unless you're accusing me of lying or misunderstanding him.
No, I've listened. No, he has basically said he comes up with the argument that, for example, many people do not think Oscar Robertson would play well in today's game.
Those are mostly Michael Jordan fans. Those are mostly
he's
Michael
making
Jordan
the point.
fans.
No, I'm not. Well, you can tell you're talking about Michael Jordan fans in general, and you're grouping me in with them. Yes. I have no idea what your point is.
No, my point is, well, how do you know?
It's not a valid point. I think Oscar Robertson would, as I said before, I think.
No, you do what they do. How do you not know my point? You do exactly what they do. You're the same people. Like if someone told you LeBron James is the greatest player of all time and he played in an era that was the best and he carried his team and all that, you would say that's a LeBron James fan. Apply the same logic to you. You're saying things that only a Michael Jordan fan would say.
I don't know where you're coming up with that. That's fine.
But how come every time
I guess it's your own personal experience.
But how come every time I explain it, you just say, I don't know what we're talking about, I don't know where it comes from.
Phil Jackson's a Michael Jordan fan. Are you going to put him in that group too?
No, he doesn't say all these things that you said. He doesn't say LeBron James' stats were deflated, he's been exposed, there's different eras that are better or worse and all that. These are stuff that people who are into Michael Jordan say.
I have said that LeBron James is one of the top players of all time, and he's in the GOAT conversation.
And that's not the only thing you said.
What?
And that's not the only thing you said. I don't need to know the good things you said because I'm not questioning those things. I'm questioning when you say questionable things. I know you said good things about LeBron James, but you've also said questionable things about him.
Well, that's why we have a difference of opinion. No, I think LeBron James would be fantastic in any era, obviously, and the fact that he's a lousy shooter outside of 3 feet doesn't mean he is statistically. I'm sorry, if you shoot 36, 37%, you're a bad shooter.
Let me ask you, have you ever heard Phil Jackson say LeBron James is a lousy shooter? Have you ever heard Oscar Robertson say LeBron James is a lousy shooter? Have you ever heard any other group of fans who are not into Michael Jordan say LeBron James is a lousy shooter? Have you heard most of his teammates, most of his coaches, most of his owners and so on, because you could always find people who don't like him.
I've heard Mark Cuban talking about exposing him and how the Dallas Mavericks exposed him. I've heard.
Wait, hang on. You see what you just
Greg
did?
Popovich exposed him.
No. You just see what you just said? I just said to you, you can find examples of people who are not into him, but have you heard most of these? And then you did what I said, you just found people who were not into him. You're not going by most people. Most of his teammates, his owners, his general managers, and so on, don't say the things that you say. It's usually Michael Jordan fans who say these things.
I don't really care what the majority of people think.
Now you don't. Now you don't. See, let me tell you how this goes. Whatever you think helps Michael Jordan is legit, and whatever you think doesn't help Michael Jordan is not legit, and whatever you think helps LeBron James is not legit, and whatever you think doesn't help LeBron James is legit. Hello?
Hello?
So what happened? Did you hang up on purpose?
It's entertaining.
So you skipped over what I asked you, and when you said that...
So here's something that you consistently do, which is wrong.
Let me just explain.
No, wait. Let me speak. Stop. I'm not going to let you speak. I'm talking. Sorry. Well, no, you have to let me finish. You interrupt people. I'm sorry. I got to talk.
No, I wasn't done though, really, actually. Hello?
Your call has been forwarded to voicemail. The person you're trying... Your call has been forwarded to voicemail. The person you're trying...
Hey, please subscribe, and if you disagree with me on something, you can go on my program and show me your facts on whatever you disagree on. If you want to go on, let's set it up. Send me an email. The email is right there in the description section. Thank you.